Your top story at 10. Leaders of the world's biggest economies are holding one of their most high-stakes G20 Summit meetings in years. The gathering is being overshadowed by the bruising trade war between the United States and China. President Cyril Ramaphosa is in Japan to tell the world that South Africa is open for business. The South African delegation is also expected to advance the cause of the African continent as a whole and speak out against unilateralism and protectionism.
As the only permanent G20 member on the African continent, South Africa says it will also be putting forward development needs for the continent. International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor says the BRICS countries will also meet on the sidelines of the summit and will jointly direct the world to pay more attention to the needs of developing countries. She says the world will be a better place based on multilateralism and working together to achieve inclusive growth.
Unilateral imposition of tariffs, countries appearing to believe that they can go it alone in their particular direction without concern or care for the economies of particularly countries in the developing world is something that we believe will not help us to continue to make advances. It's very clear that no country can survive without trade with the rest of the world, and to do so we must have proper rules so that all of us are dealt with in a manner that makes us believe that the rules we're all playing to are fair.
Outside the conference center, businesses in Osaka hope they will be able to sell more during this time as the city hosts delegates from various parts of the world. With Osaka schools closed for the duration of the conference, there is hope that even locals will have more time to spend at the shops.
そうですね。
We expect that many people from abroad is coming to our shopping mall, and at the same time, due to the G20, lots of elementary school, junior high school, and senior high school has day off, so as to control the people. Therefore, we expect that those school students and family will be coming more here.
予測はしております。
Most G20 leaders have arrived over the past 2 days. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been holding bilateral meetings with the different members ahead of the summit due to start today. Gloria Sifagomosi, SABC News, Osaka, Japan.
All right, let's get more on this summit. It's an all-important summit happening in Osaka, Japan, the G20. Now we're joined by Chris Gilmore. He's an investment analyst and he joins us via Skype. Also, SABC News economics editor Thandeka Mbeki is here in studio. Good morning to you both. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Maybe Thandeka, let's start off with you. This is a very important summit, the G20 Summit, some of the world's most richest economies gathering in under one roof, number of international issues. But South Africa's participation, important?
Very important. We are part of the global economy. South Africa's economy is very well integrated into the global economy. And the economic headwinds facing the global economy are affecting us as well. The weak recovery and low growth globally is going to have a definite impact on us. Now, South Africa has to try and carry through a message that we are still a good investment destination. We are still a good bet for the money of international investors, and that we will put in place a promising, stable, and understandable policy dispensation that has the ability to generate growth as well as attract foreign investment.
Chris, issues of global economy, trade and investment, innovation, environment, the energy, employment, women's empowerment, development, and how those are major issues. And I guess these important issues talks to South Africa's national priorities as well. So from a South African point of view, what should be prioritized here?
Look, that is quite right. I mean, this is a very, very important meeting. From a South African perspective, we have to come to terms with the fact that we are a small, open economy, and we're subject to all the vagaries of what's on side, in particularly in the Western world. Now, there's been a fundamental changed in the past couple of years since Dr. Trump has taken over. And basically what that means is that America is using trade as a weapon. And specifically the U.S. trade circle a lot of fight is the longest-serving administration. And you see it with China time. And I think it's a case of who blames first. Don't forget, America doesn't really trade with anybody. In terms of trade percentage of GDP, for the lowest exporting country in the world, we could use that as a weapon. So that's what I'm here. And I know there's been a lot of anti-American rhetoric expressed in this time. But you know, as I say, the world is changing. And so that's what wants to stay in that big. You know, look, we're a very small economy, only ranked number 34 in the world. We have to bear in mind there are certain groups that we have to abide by. And you don't necessarily want to go antagonizing the biggest player and the guy who's actually seeking to move with it.
Chris, unfortunately, the sound that's coming through is very muffled, so we'll drop the line and try to reconnect with you if possible. But thank you very much indeed for coming through. Chris Gilmore is an investment analyst there. Tandeka, let's just talk about South Africa's part in this G20. Do you think other nations take us seriously enough?
Well, let's talk about what has already happened. The President Cyril Ramaphosa has already met with President Putin.
Russia,
and they have begun to discuss upcoming conferences and future engagements. For example, the Russia-Africa conference that is in the offing, as well as the soon-to-be held in Brazil meeting of BRICS. So they've had time to cohere on a number of issues facing both Africa and Russia, as well as discuss the state of the BRICS countries and what they could jointly contribute to those.
What's that relationship currently now?
You mean the South African...
The BRICS
relationship. It's complex. It's primarily led by China. And the president met yesterday with President Xi Jinping of China. And China has been trying to make it more of a collective gathering, even though it's very dominated by China. But for South Africa, that relationship has begun to yield in that the BRICS Development Bank is increasingly becoming part of the discussions about how to rescue some of our SOEs, including Eskom. So that relationship is about to bear fruit at the financial level, and I'm sure it continues to strengthen South Africa's talk and puts meat behind the talk about the importance of multilateralism in an era where America is pretty much acting unilaterally and destroying multilateralism and the spirit of international cooperation.
Well, let's just zoom in on our relationship with China and China's relationship with the United States currently. This trade war that's currently going on. The U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening, 25% of tariffs on some $300 billion worth of Chinese goods. How does that turn around and affect us?
It affects us enormously because we have got strong relations with both nations, and when the two elephants fight, our commodities and our goods and our own economy suffers. But I have been finding great difficulty in figuring out, in deciphering what is exactly presidential bluster and Twitter and what will actually pan out. Now, we at the SABC received a visit from the Japanese government via their embassy, and they were very keen to explain to us that the Japanese government sees itself as something of a mediator, something of a détente breaker, and that many can expect that because they are involved and they are a steady pair of hands, the worst will not come to pass. And Osaka is supposed to be that G20 meeting where sanity prevails finally, and that the trade winds are normalized, and that global trade returns to an even keel.
You would hope.
We would hope. Indeed, we have nothing but hope.
But what should South Africa's approach be? I mean, when these two, as you say, to continue your metaphor, the elephants are fighting, should we just stand back and just say, hang on, you sort out your issues and then we'll come in? Or should we have a vested interest in them?
Well, we've started in trying to sort out our trade deficit with the rest of the continent.
Right.
And to promote trade, intra-African trade. Mm-hmm. And we've also started looking at our basket of exports and analyzing how exactly these bad winds will affect us and trying to find alternative routes. Now, you must remember Europe, our main trading partner, is affected greatly by what's going on. And to look at our technology space and to see how best we can play in that space. And I am certain that the future, the fourth industrial revolution and the future relations with China were centered around technological cooperation. And I also believe that the innovations brought about by the Chinese on SOE reform, remember that they introduced under Xi Jinping and his predecessor that hybrid model where SOEs were partially state and publicly owned, but also privately owned and listed on many of the Asian stock markets and beyond. And judging from what the Minister of Public Enterprises has been saying about many of these global, mainly Chinese state-owned enterprises playing as big players in the global 500 companies, he began to signal that we are looking at the Chinese model of SOE reform. So we would imagine that on the sidelines of the G20 meeting and whispering or discussing with Xi Jinping, our president must have definitely raise those issues.
I mean, the big question is, can the doors of diplomacy be opened when President Xi and President Trump meet on this bilateral on the sidelines? I understand it's happening tomorrow. It's one of the last bilaterals that will be happening at the G20. Do you think Huawei will be on the table?
Indeed.
Yeah. And that will be a big gain for China in order to get Huawei back into contention?
China has got a plan B for Huawei, and Huawei has a plan B for itself, and it's increasingly beginning to look like plan A, which is we don't need you. This impasse actually helps us to build up and beef up our self-reliance and our internal capacity. We're going to bring new innovations to the table. We're going to expedite our own internal innovation and capacity and look at the Asian and the Chinese markets for the future. But here's the thing about South Africa. You asked the question about whether other nations take us seriously. Well, that depends on what we do to increase both our soft power and our hard power. We need to fix our economy for us to be taken seriously. We need to put concrete growth plans on the table that can be understood and comprehended by our trading partners and by our political allies. And then, based on those kind of hard concrete plans that South Africa must bring to bear, then we can build up our cultural power, our soft power, and the suaveness and the statesman-like diplomacy that we have so sorely lacked in the past 10 years.
And there's obviously lots of gain with regards to Brexit as well. We could be the beneficiaries of that, isn't it, as well? Chris Gilmore is back on the line with us. Chris, thank you very much indeed for coming through. Look, the rising tensions between the US and Iran, reportedly Iran's president saying that the White House is suffering from mental disability. Iran is, of course, not a G20 nation, but we can assume that they will be talked about a lot. Again, what do you think South Africa's posture should be towards this issue?
South Africa has always adopted a fairly non-aligned position with regard to global politics, ever since democracy. And I suspect that will continue. One has to be careful here. As I was saying earlier, which didn't really come through, the global order is changing. Ever since 1945, America has been the kind of global policeman. That role has changed. And America is now using trade as a weapon. And it's a very effective weapon. And especially Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Secretary, who is the longest-serving member of the Trump administration. I believe he's the kind of power behind the throne, if you like. So coming back to Iran, Iran is being strangled by sanctions. South Africa doesn't really play a big role in this. I mean, there used to be a big taker of Iranian oil, but the Americans made it abundantly clear at the beginning of the year that anyone who takes oil from Iran are themselves going to be sanctioned.
Yeah.
So I think one has to be very, very careful the way you play Iran. I mean, Trump has made this a far bigger issue than need be the case, and he's alienated a lot of people, a lot of business people all around the world, particularly from the UK, who were trying to get in and do a lot of business with the Iranians. So it has the potential to escalate and get out of control. But I think with the rhetoric, we have to scrape past the rhetoric and see what's really going on there in the Middle East. Iran is taking major strain. Sanctions are biting. One only kind of wonders what the end game is going to be as far as the Americans are concerned.
And you can't underestimate Iran. I was listening to a former CIA operative, and they're one of the most battle-ready nations as well. This is a far cry from Afghanistan and Iraq, isn't it?
Oh, yes. No, they've always had a very big military. Again, one has to put this in perspective. If you look at military might, there is no country on earth comes anywhere close to America. If every country on earth started mobilizing and trying to catch up with America, it would take them until the year 2240 before they collectively you would make an impact. So China is nowhere there. So they can huff and they can puff and they can blow as much as they like. But America still, unfortunately, for many countries in the world, it still has massive naval power, particularly. And when they send some super carriers into the Gulf, they can wreak a lot of havoc on Iran. They don't even have to go into the country. They don't have to engage in a ground war. They can do it all physically, from the air and from the sea. So look, the Iranians do have, as you say, a very significant army and air force and the like. But in comparison to the Americans, it's not even measurable.
No, 100%. Thandeka, there's the second investment conference that's coming up here in South Africa. Do you think President Ramaphosa will use this platform, the G20, to twist some arms?
I suspect so, and I think that he will seek to drum up more investment abroad in order to fortify his message to the upcoming investment conference.
What about the sustainable goals? We're going there to further, I guess, the agenda of Africa, and that's critical as well, isn't it?
We have been missing many of the sustainable development goals, and we need to really sit down with the rest of the continent and figure out a way to play catch-up.
Yeah. Chris, we didn't get your response earlier on when I asked you the question with regards to South Africa's priorities. There's a number of international issues that will be discussed there, such as trade and investment, global economy, the women's issues, women empowerment, health development. Those are critical issues, and it talks to some of South Africa's national priorities as well as spelt out in the recent State of the Nation address.
Yes, indeed. And look, I mean, from what I remember Thandeka talking about a moment ago, we have to bear in mind that South Africa is a relatively small economy. About number 34 in the world. So, yes, it's great to have the input, but we've got to bear in mind that it's not such a huge force. We can lead by example to an extent. But as I said previously, America is really exerting its trade muscle. We are a small, open economy. Trade is vitally important to us. Now, all those good things that you mentioned, yes, of course, they're vitally important. But at this point in time, with growth being so pathetic, we had a negative growth print in the first quarter. We really have to get back onto some sort of reasonable and sustainable growth path. Now, that is of vital importance. If we don't do that, we're probably going to get a downgrade from Moody's towards the end of the year, and that would be catastrophic in terms of the value of the rand, in terms of interest rates and the like. So I think yes, in terms of being able to be a leader and regarding many of those other, dare I call them softer issues, I don't mean that with any disrespect.
Yes.
But I think the main thing is trade, and the main thing is to be able to demonstrate that there is a plan in place to get far better growth than we have currently got on the table at present.
Well, Thandeka, talking to Chris's point, we have some ambitious goals as well as spelt out in the reply to the SONA debate. President Ramaphosa saying that the goal is to be among the top 50 global performers in the World Bank annual doing business report in the next 3 years. Reasonable?
It is reasonable if we take definite policy measures and we follow through with rigorous execution. We should be able to lower the cost and the hurdles to doing business in this country.
Yeah. What are some of, look, let's just explore that and some of the hurdles we need to jump over in order to get to that. What would you say those are?
Well, there are the big ones, like we need to grow faster because investors are chasing yields. And if we are unable to grow, we will not become investable. Then we have to deal seriously with corruption because investors shy away from an environment that they can't quite read. And if you can't read an environment, it's most likely made opaque and dense due to corruption. Corruption makes the environment very convoluted because there are so many shadow players that you cannot reliably say that you can. Then we need to improve the rule of law, which is related to the issue about corruption. We need to get serious about prosecution for wrongdoing and for commercial crimes. And then the other thing that we need to do, I believe, is to look at the issue of the cost of capital. And then the last thing that we really seriously need to do is to look at our investment space and create more one-stop shops, less bureaucracy, and decrease the amount of time it takes to get a business registered and up and ready.
And also combating the illicit flows as well, isn't it? That will be key in addressing this issue there at the G20 Summit.
Yes, and we are signatory to OECD conventions that deal with illicit flows and the operation of tax havens. But we haven't been able to quite stem the tide of money leaving our shores illicitly. The Reserve Bank is going to have to tighten up on that, and so is SARS, and so are a number of institutions that were previously significantly weakened. They're going to have to beef up their muscle and their capacity to deal with illicit flows. And then this will improve our own adherence to the OECD agreements that we have ratified.
Chris Gilmore, what would count as a win for President Ramaphosa tomorrow when this G20 summit is over?
The only thing that's going to count as a win is tangible evidence that we're going to get big and sustained foreign investment and we're going to get growth. I mean, I listen to what Thandeka was saying. I agree 120% with her. Absolutely. I think what President Ramaphosa has got to do is got to come back from this, innovated, energized, and has got to have got a message across that South Africa is a country that I think that most people, most other countries, they actually like, and they want South Africa to succeed. But we've got to cut through a lot of this red tape. We've got to realize that the ability to get out of this longest slump that we've had since 1945 is going to take more than just monetary and fiscal policy. It's going to take more radical measures. It's going to have to. We're going to have to think much more laterally, and with the help and with the guidance, if you like, of many of our friends from overseas, that is something that can be achieved. But I think we have to get out of this straitjacketed approach that thinks that we can just fiddle around with interest rates and tax rates. No, those days are long gone. We've got to be far more radical, and by that I do not mean radical economic transformation. I mean, I'm talking about structural reform. And that is something that it will take longer to sink in and longer to achieve, but I think the results in the longer term will be far more sustainable.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for coming through and breaking down the variables. It is indeed an important conference summit, the G20 Summit happening in Osaka, Japan. That was Thandeka Mbeki as well as Chris Gilmore, investment analyst. All right, we're going to take a quick break. I'll get you more news next.